Welcome to This Explainer. We're jumping right in today because we've got to take a really deep dive into the absolute ground level realities of the 2026 Denver real estate market. Whether you're just sort of casually keeping an eye on your home's equity, or you're literally gearing up to hammer a for sale sign into your front lawn tomorrow morning, the landscape out there has completely changed. I mean, let's just be honest for a second here. Sellers are feeling severe whiplash right now. For years, sellers held absolutely all the cards. You could practically just whisper to your neighbor that your house was for sale and you'd have a bidding war on your hands by sundown. But that whole boom era frenzy, yeah, that's settled down and the rules of engagement have shifted dramatically. So today, we're going to break down some truly fascinating insights directly from Denver, Dirk and Company. We'll be digging into the hard data, the shifting psychology behind selling right now, and towards the end, well, I promise you, we have one of the most wild, totally unexpected real estate surprises you will ever hear. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the top seller mistake. We're going to start by uncovering the single most costly error a home seller can make in the Denver market right now. When the market shifts like this, all those old strategies just stop working. And this particular mistake is catching a staggering number of sellers entirely off guard. So ask yourself this. What's going to cost you more money than skipping professional staging? What's going to hurt your bottom line worse than terrible, blurry smartphone photos of your living room? Sellers will agonize for weeks over paint swatches, or they'll literally lose sleep over whether to launch their listing on a Thursday instead of a Friday. When that seller anxiety hits, people tend to obsess over the cosmetic details. But there is a silent killer of real estate equity out there that's far more dangerous than bad lighting or picking the wrong day of the week. Here is the stark reality. It's pricing your home too high right out of the gate. Now, I want to pause here for a second because, look, we absolutely have to acknowledge human nature. After years of watching Denver home values just climb to the moon, it's completely natural to look around and feel like your home is worth absolute top dollar. Sellers have watched their equity just explode on paper, and honestly, letting go of that absolute peak number is incredibly difficult. But in today's market, the number you feel your home is worth and the number a buyer is actually willing to write a check for absolutely must align. Because if they don't, you are in for a very rough, drawn-out ride. The financial and, frankly, the psychological toll of a listing that just sits there, completely ignored by the market, is absolutely devastating to your bottom line. Let's move to Section 2, Denver by the numbers, and see how this builds. Because this isn't just about real estate agents sharing their personal opinions. This is about what the hard data is practically screaming at us right now. The gap between seller expectations and buyer willingness, it's highly measurable. Just look at this. 60% of active Denver listings have had to take a price cut. 60%. That's up from 58% a year ago. Now, sure, a 2% year-over-year jump might not sound massive on the surface, but in macro real estate terms, it shows a continuing, solidifying trend. This isn't just a seasonal blip. Think about what this actually means in the real world. More than half of the people trying to sell their homes right now guessed wrong on their initial price. They aimed way too high, the market actively rejected it, and they were forced to publicly slash their price to desperately try and win buyers' attention back. And while that whole price correction dance is happening, the clock is just relentlessly ticking. The average days on market in Denver has now reached 30 days. That's a 14% climb from just a year ago. Gone are the days of putting a home on the market on Thursday and sifting through 20 above asking offers by Sunday night. The typical home is sitting for a full month. And let's really think about the reality of what sitting on the market for 30 days actually feels like. It means keeping your house immaculately, perfectly clean 24/7 just in case someone wants a last-minute showing. It means packing up the kids and the dog and leaving right in the middle of dinner time. And crucially, it means paying another month of a high-interest mortgage, another month of property taxes, and another month of insurance. Those carrying costs of an overpriced home, they literally drain your equity day by day. So why is all this happening? Well, it's because of this number right here. Active inventory across the Denver metro is sitting above 13,400 listings. That's enough homes to fill a small town. Buyers are no longer operating in that blind, FOMO-driven panic. They have massive leverage right now simply because they have options. Picture a buyer touring homes this weekend. They're looking at your house, and then they're walking down the street and looking at 5 others in your exact same neighborhood. If your home feels overpriced by even 5%, they aren't going to bother negotiating with you. They aren't going to write a hopeful offer. They're simply going to move on and buy the house 3 doors down that was priced correctly from day one. And this leads us directly into a really painful domino effect that we call the overpricing trap. Let's just walk through these steps methodically. Step 1, you price too high out of the gate and the listing just sits there collecting dust for 60 to 90 days. Step 2, a deeply ingrained stigma develops. Buyers pull up the listing on their phones, see how many days it's been active, and immediately wonder, okay, what is structurally wrong with this house? Is the foundation cracking? Is the roof caving in? Step 3, because of that perceived stigma, the buyers who do finally come along, they smell blood in the water. They know you're frustrated, so they submit aggressive lowball offers. And step 4, the grand finale. The seller actually ends up netting significantly less money than if they had just priced it accurately on day one. You end up chasing the market downward, and it costs you heavily.
Which brings us to Section 3, pricing, data versus emotion.
So how do we fix this? How do we avoid the trap? We have to shift our entire approach. Getting the price right in a shifted market is not as simple as pulling a magical number out of thin air just to fund your next purchase. It fundamentally comes down to emotional pricing versus data pricing. Emotional pricing is just going with your gut. Or honestly worse, it's basing your home's value on what your neighbor's house sold for 2 years ago, actually scratch that, at the absolute peak of the post-pandemic frenzy. Now, sellers have real valid emotional connections to their homes. I get it. You raised your kids there, you poured your blood, sweat, and tears into renovating that kitchen yourself. But here's the hard truth. Just because your neighbor got $800K during the absolute peak of the frenzy, it doesn't mean your newly renovated kitchen guarantees you $825K today. Data pricing requires putting all those deep feelings aside and having a highly objective conversation grounded entirely in what the market is actually doing today. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the professionals execute that objective conversation. Before Denver, Dirk and Company ever put a listing price on paper, they rigorously pull 4 key metrics. First, recent comparable sales, meaning what actually closed in the last 30 to 60 days, not last year. Second, active current competition. Basically, who are you actively competing against in the real estate beauty pageant right now? Third, days on market trends specifically targeted to your exact price range. And fourth, the close-to-list price ratios happening right nearby. This last one is absolutely vital. It tells you if sellers in your neighborhood are actually getting their full asking price or if they're having to secretly negotiate down behind closed doors after the inspection. You've got to synthesize all 4 of these points together so your pricing strategy becomes a logical, bulletproof conclusion rather than just an emotional guess. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly by Dirk Nygaard himself. Take a second and really absorb this. The sellers winning right now are the ones who price with data, not emotion. The market will always tell you the truth, one way or another. Man, I absolutely love that quote. Hits the nail right on the head. Data is your best friend in this market, not your enemy. If you price correctly from day one and you present your home in strong condition, you will absolutely find buyers. Well-priced homes in Denver are still selling beautifully. But if you try to bluff the market is going to call your bluff every single time. All right, Section 4, a wild real estate surprise. Let's pivot for a moment here. We've talked heavily about data and strategy, but real estate is ultimately a business of dealing with highly unpredictable human beings. And, apparently, other species. Dirk shared a story from his 20-plus years in the business that is just too good not to highlight for you all. Recently, Dirk was preparing a property for sale and coordinating the showings. The occupant told him they had a very, very tight window for when buyers could actually come inside and see the house. Why? Because of the occupant's pet. Now, in a market with over 13,000 active listings, tight showing windows are usually the absolute kiss of death. Buyers will just skip difficult houses. But in real estate, working around pets happens all the time. Now, what's really interesting about this is the assumption we all make when we hear troublesome pet. You naturally picture maybe a highly aggressive dog that needed to be taken for a long walk during the exact hours of the showings. Or maybe a very nervous indoor cat that might dart out the front door the second a buyer turns the knob. As an agent, you just schedule around the dog walker, right? Simple. But no, the pet was a raccoon. Yup, a raccoon. And to be perfectly clear, this wasn't a raccoon just hanging out in the backyard by the fence. This wasn't a raccoon knocking over the garbage cans in the alleyway, and it certainly wasn't a wild raccoon squatting up in the chimney that needed pest control. This was a fully domesticated raccoon living freely, day in and day out, inside the house. The entire showing schedule for this massive real estate transaction had to revolve around a raccoon's daily routine. Just imagine the absolute absurdity of a highly qualified buyer with a pre-approval letter standing on the front porch, but they can't come inside because a raccoon is currently having its scheduled afternoon nap in the primary bedroom. It turns out Colorado's native trash pandas can quite literally impact your home's final sale price if buyers are locked out. It just goes to show that no matter how meticulously you crunch the data, This business will always find a way to completely surprise you. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. I really want you to think carefully about the variables you can control versus the ones you absolutely can't. If the market shifted even further tomorrow and your house sat for 30 long days, or hey, if you suddenly had to schedule your showings around a wild animal taking up residence in your living room, would your pricing strategy be strong enough to hold up through all that chaos? Grounding your price in hard data from day one is literally the absolute best shield you have against the unpredictable realities of the real estate market. So ask yourself, does your current strategy rely on hope or does it rely on facts?